Hey there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond. I welcome you to another video in the NCAA SuperCup series. Of course, this is the preview to the Final Four, which will be at the Rose Bowl. And there will be a finals preview and all that. So yeah, so we had 8 teams battle each other for bragging rights and supremacy at the Sugar, Cotton, Fiesta, and Orange Bowl. Now, I screwed up with the Georgia Notre Dame game, and I accidentally put it in the Cotton Bowl thing instead of the Sugar, but regardless of what happened, there were a lot of mistakes and all that, so there was no games in New Orleans. I apologize. However, there were 4 very tight games. So, because the Rose Bowl hosted the Final Four, it would be Sugar, Cotton, Orange, and Fiesta in that order, or scoff, if you will. So the first matchup was Georgia versus Notre Dame. Now, Georgia going into this game had a problem. They had 2 of their 4 defensive linemen out for the game due to injury. They could gain them back for the semifinal, but they were out. So Georgia had a weak defensive line. Notre Dame had no injuries whatsoever. So basically, that's what happened. So Georgia was the 1 seed in the Sugar Bowl bracket. They had a overtime match against Marshall that should not have been in overtime. But thanks to Marshall's 3 quarterbacks, they actually managed to put Georgia into overtime. In the second round, Georgia had to deal with a game Clemson club, and then they took on Arizona State and narrowly beat them. So Georgia had not beaten a team by double digits, which is unusual. So heading into the game against Notre Dame, they only won by an average of 5.3 points a game. Notre Dame, on the other hand, had done enough. They had only given up 6 points. 3 to Western Kentucky, 9 to Fresno, and 3 to Boise. So they had not given up a touchdown. And they had scored 87 points themselves, or almost 30 points per game. So Georgia and Notre Dame would be battling tooth and nail at the Sugar Bowl. And unfortunately, because of Eric Sire getting injured early, Georgia lost their touch, and Notre Dame wins 20-10. So the Fighting Irish are in the Final Four. And I did a tournament history based on the new era from 2015 onwards, well, 14-15. So I've been doing this for 7 years now. I determined that the Notre Dame history is like this. So I get my notebook out. So the notebook says in the 2014-15 season, they were seeded 4th in their group. They beat Arizona but lost to Texas A&M. In 2015-16, they were a 5 seed. They beat Wisconsin, UCLA, Oregon, and Marshall, getting to the Final Four, but losing to West Virginia somehow. So West Virginia got to the final at Notre Dame's expense. 2017, they didn't even qualify. The 2018 tournament, they were a 2 seed. They shut out Texas 22-0, but they lost to Florida State by 22, which was heavily huge. In 2019, they were a 1 seed. They crushed Temple in the fine powder 16-3. They beat Virginia 24-7, but then Clemson 21-17. You'll remember that in the fantastic finish as Clemson was down at the 1-yard line and drove 99 yards for the winning touchdown to deny Notre Dame a chance into the semifinals. To the quarterfinals. In 2020, 2 years ago, they were an 8 seed. They beat Marshall 17-0. They beat Ohio State, shockingly, 21-14. They took down Penn State 20-0. And then they took revenge on Clemson for ruining them the previous year by winning 35-10, getting to the semifinal against Georgia. But Georgia beat them 24-12. So they got revenge on Georgia for what happened in 2020, not getting them to the finals. In the 2021 tournament, last year's tournament, they beat Memphis, but shockingly only scored 3 points against Nebraska, of all teams. So then this year, of course, they beat Western Kentucky 34-3, Fresno 30-0, Boise 23-3, and Georgia 20-10. So we'll see what happens. Over in the Cotton Bowl bracket, the winner of the Sugar would face the winner of the Cotton. So Notre Dame went first. Then the Cotton Bowl between Oklahoma and OSU, or the Ohio State University. Oklahoma is a 1 seed, crushed Eastern Carolina, had a tough time with UAB, only winning 14-7. And then Missouri beating Missouri by a pair of touchdowns. Ohio State, on the other hand, was a 2 seed, had a tough time with Toledo before finally beating them. They crushed NC State in the fine powder. they had troubles with Wisconsin, only winning 15-9. So then it was a matchup. Oklahoma had a plus 45 point differential, and Ohio State had a plus 43. So basically, these guys were winning by almost 2 touchdowns a game every time. And in this game, Oklahoma and Ohio State both had a defensive lineman hurt. Cam Hayward still is injured and won't be. And if Ohio State got to the semifinal, they still would be without him. But once they get to the final, if they get to the final, they have him. In the end, it was Ohio State crushing Oklahoma 24-6. So both number 1 seeds fell at the hurdle. So Ohio State wins. They will take on Notre Dame. So Notre Dame, Ohio State, they've only met once, and that was in the second round 2 years ago. So Notre Dame obviously will have a bit of a advantage, thinking that an Ohio State will be looking for revenge for what happened 2 years ago. Ohio State, in their tournament history, has been to every tournament, every one of the 8 tournaments. So Ohio State's the only one of the Final Four that have done that they haven't missed one tournament. The 2015 tournament, they were the 1 seed, crushing Utah before losing to Clemson 42-17. Ouch. 2016, they were the 2 seed, beating NC State, only by 13 though, but lost to Utah, who got revenge for that first round shellacking. In 2017, they were a 2 seed, crushing Empire State 31-0, crushing Kansas State 24-0, and then in their third game, they couldn't hold Boise off the scoreboard. In fact, they lost 24-7 to Boise. In 2018, they were the 4 seed to beat Florida Atlantic 26-0. They beat LSU 12-0, so they had back-to-back shutouts again. Man, that's weird how you start back-to-back years with like back-to-back shutouts. And again, they couldn't keep their third opponent off the board. It was Bama. And yes, it was Bama's last-second touchdown from Stabler to Julio Jones that got them the win. And, of course, Bama then, in the next round, were Hail Married by Virginia Tech, that famous game. And then Virginia Tech was got a last-second loss pinned on them by Wisconsin. So basically, it started a chain of command. In 2019, they were a 2 seed. They crushed L Tech by 13. They had a tough time with Boston College, only won by 3. They beat Northern Illinois, who made a Cinderella run. So they beat them by 9. They beat Oregon by 13 to get to the semifinal, in which they faced Clemson and lost 28-10. What is it about Clemson? Yeah. 2 years ago, they were the 1 seed to beat, and they beat Cal before Notre Dame came and beat them by 7. So that was shocking. Last year, they were a 1 seed in their group. They crushed NC State 42-7. So yeah, NC State has really had the bad luck of facing Ohio State 3 times and losing all 3 times. But West Virginia beat them 17-13 last year in the second round, which sucks. And then this year, they beat Toledo 17-7, NC State 27-0, 15-9 against Wisconsin, and now 24-6 against Oklahoma. So it'll be Notre Dame, Ohio State in one semifinal, and that will be the night semifinal. The day semifinal will be the other 2 teams. So Notre Dame coming into today has 107 points scored and 16 against, roughly close to 27 points per game for Notre Dame, and they've only given up 4 points per game, which is amazing. I mean, you only give up 16 points and scoring 100 plus yourself. Ohio State's plus minus is 83 to 22, so they have a plus 61 point percentage, and Notre Dame's got a plus 91. So yeah, so Ohio State's scored like 20 points per game on average. So Notre Dame will have to deal with Ohio State, who wants revenge for what happened 2 years ago in the pod system. No, it was not the pod system. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All right, so over in the Orange Bowl bracket was Penn State versus Wake Forest. Penn State, a 12 seed, they qualified late. They had to go to BYU, and they beat BYU 23-14. So then they faced Oklahoma State in a wild overtime game, which Penn State won on a field goal. And then they beat Bama, shockingly, 17-10 in Orlando, so to get this far. So that was huge. Meanwhile, Wake was the 3 seed because they qualified so fast in real life. They took on Georgia State, crushed them. Then took on Western Michigan and narrowly handled them. And then they took on Miami. And, of course, you know that's the big Fantastic Finish. You'll see in the Fantastic Finishes board video at the end of the tournament that, you know, they were up against it. They had needed a Hail Mary touchdown to tie the game against Miami, and then Miami decided to say, you know what, let Wake Forest get a 4th and 20 chance. And Wake did it. Wake got a touchdown to beat Miami. Wake had only gave up 17 points in this tournament, and Penn State gave up 45 or 15 a game. So Penn State had the worst defense of the 8 teams left. Wake Forest didn't have Hugh McElhaney at running back. He was still hurt, and they were hoping to win this game against Penn State to get him back, but it failed miserably. Penn State put up a great defensive effort. 17-0, Wake Forest had no chance. So let me just check the Penn State road to everything. Penn State did not qualify for the first tournament in 2014-15, and that's the only time they've missed a tournament. 2016, they were a 7 seed, and they beat Monroe by 5 points. Talk about lucky. And then they had Bama, and they beat them 34-31 in a classic. Before Marshall, yes, Marshall crushed them into fine powder 26-7. I don't know. I think that was the Empire State run to the quarterfinals. I don't think so. I think it was a few years later. But anyway. And then 2017 tournament, they were the 5 seed to face Toledo. On home turf, they lose 23-13 to Toledo, of all teams. Fuck. And then the next year, 2018, they were the 4 seed against Central Florida. They didn't score 1 freaking point. They lost again, 20-0. It's like, wow, Penn State, heavy favorites. And then they lose to teams like Marshall, Toledo, and Central Florida. 2019, they qualified late, got in as a 12 seed, and took on Georgia. And surprisingly, they beat Georgia 12-7. So I guess they were better as the underdogs. The worst part about the 2019 tournament was they lost to Dakota State 16-10 in a shocker. I didn't do anything to make Dakotas beat Penn State, I promise you. But man, Dakota State getting to the Sweet 16, that's just shocking. Penn State, notorious for losing to teams that they should have been beating. And then in 2020, they were a 4 seed 2 years ago. They beat A&M 20-9, and then they beat Hawaii 27-7, and then they lost. But the good news for Penn State is they lost to Notre Dame 20-0, because Penn State went out of the tournament to a team that deserved to beat them, not a Marshall, not a Toledo, or a Central Florida or Dakotas. So Penn State lost to a team that it was a worthy loss, not a pathetic loss. And then last year they were a 13 seed in the pod system. They beat Ohio, like the MAC Ohio, 37-14. They faced Oregon, beat them 21-7, beat Nebraska 14-3, and then they beat Indiana 26-6. So Penn State got to the Final Four last year, so this is back-to-back semifinal appearances. They faced my beloved Arkansas Razorbacks and got crushed 21-3. Pig sweep, bitches. And then this year, of course, they beat BYU 23-14, 24-21 against Oklahoma State, 17-10 against Baylor, and 17-0 against Wake. So they have done a little bit better defensively, but we'll see what they do. And now the fourth semifinalist, the Fiesta Bowl between Baylor and Ole Miss. Now, the Fiesta Bowl bracket was a big mess because there was no one who could take control of this one except for Oregon or Iowa. Since he was the 1 seed, in real life, but they didn't prove it in the thing, losing in the first round. Baylor, as an 8 seed, took care of Eastern Michigan 27-0 easily. They took on Mississippi State, who beat Cincy. And then they beat Mississippi State 27-17. Got to the third round against Army, who was making a Cinderella run of their own. And it was close. Baylor actually was at 14-14 at the half against Army. 14-14 in the fourth quarter against Army, and they managed to win 24-14. And so they took on Ole Miss, who as a 10 seed beat Empire State 17-7. Oregon got crushed 27-6 by Ole Miss. At the same time, Iowa lost to Kansas State. So the two co-favorites of the Fiesta Bowl bracket both lost on the same day. And the teams that beat them, K-State and Ole Miss, would fight. And Ole Miss won 21-12 against K-State. And Ole Miss did lose one of their defensive linemen. Baylor had no injuries. And it showed. Baylor won 14-0. So both Baylor and Penn State made the semifinals, will face each other, and they're coming off shutouts of each other, goose eggs. In fact, Baylor and Ole Miss were 0-0 at the half. Kind of pathetic, don't you think? They said that whoever won the Fiesta Bowl would have the weakest path to the final, path for the Final Four, and Baylor did. Baylor used its good old defense to take down Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss was huge. I mean, they had Joseph Adai and C.D. Lamb, who were cast off from other teams, or else. Win or else. So Baylor has scored 92 points for, 27 against, so they have a plus 65. And Penn State's got a plus 36. So anyway, Penn State's got the worst defensive mark, giving up more than 10 points a game. They're the only team that give up 10 points per game. So Baylor will take on Penn State in the semifinal. Oh, and I forgot to mention about Baylor. So Baylor's tournament run in the past, well, this is the 8th tournament in the new format. They made the first one in 2015. They beat Boise as a 14 seed. They went to Boise and beat them. But then USC beat them by 8, although it was close. Then the next year they failed to make it in. 2017, they were a 2 seed because they'd had such a great year. And they beat Army 10-0. That's how bad it was. And then FSU came and beat them by a field goal. So Baylor's like, oh, man. How did we fuck it up? And that loss haunted Baylor as they missed the next 2 tournaments. But in 2020, they got in as a 4 seed and beat Iowa and lost and faced Iowa, but lost to Iowa 21-20. So they have been really had tight losses. So 2 appearances in 4 years, like in a 5-year span, they had 3 tournament misses and 2 appearances and 2 losses by close margins. And then in 2021, they were a 13 seed against Houston and beat them 34-31. So Houston got shocked. And then they faced Colorado and beat them. So Baylor was looking good. They were making their own Cinderella run. But West Virginia ended their run 42-7. So that's huge and all that. West Virginia just beat Ohio State in the previous round, and then they beat Baylor. West Virginia, I believe, went out in the semifinal last year. I can't remember. No, I can't remember how West Virginia did. I think it was the team that Clemson beat in the semi. I don't know. Win or lose. No, it was Penn State, wasn't it? I don't remember. Anyway, this year they were a 8 seed. They beat Eastern Michigan, they beat Mississippi State, and they beat Army. Oh, yeah, and then they beat Ole Miss, too, so I have to write that down into the old breadbasket. So, yeah, this is the first semifinal for Baylor. This is the second for Ohio State, the second for Penn State, and the third time for Notre Dame be in the semifinals. But here's the stat that's going to make you go, no, none of those 4 teams have ever been to a final, much less win the title. So basically, we're going to have 2 first-time finalists, and we're going to have a first-time champion, no matter what happens with Notre Dame versus Ohio State and Baylor versus Penn State. So none of these guys have ever been to the final, much less win the championship. So that's kind of stupid. Of course, I got to give you the old board here. And that's just, ignore the stuff on the bottom. That's for title belt boxing. But anyway, so that's it. You got Notre Dame, Ohio State, Baylor, Penn State. At the Rose Bowl, which will have the 2 semifinals, there will be a game for COVID. There will be a COVID bowl. So there will be a match. There will be a rivalry matchup. But the key is that there are a few drawbacks. It cannot be, the 2 teams cannot be in the NCAA tournament, like the 64-team tournament. So, like, people like Florida or Tennessee and, like, Texas, they're eligible. Like, their matchups are, they could, We could easily see Florida State because they both missed. So we could have the Battle of Florida for the COVID Bowl, but it'll be what the game decides will be the COVID Bowl. And then, of course, on the Friday, there will be the championship game to decide it all. And a note that the video highlights and all that, I will make sure that the first and fourth quarters are in its entirety. So I will be doing the first and fourth quarters in their entirety. The second and third quarters will be simulated, of course, but I will do the first and last quarters in its entirety for the two semifinals, and then the finals will be all in its entirety. Even the COVID game will be in its entirety. I will make sure of that. You have my word. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Diamond, and let's hope we have a great finals matchup in this tournament.